Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at the three main indicators of economic development, GDP per capita, the Human Development Index, and then the more recently GNI per capita used by the World Bank. So in terms of the main indicator used to signal living standards, in the past the main figure being used is GDP per capita. So GDP per capita, or income per person, just generally defines whether a nation is developing or a developed country, and also is the definition used for low income and high income countries. So in low income countries, it's generally referred to people living on less than $2.86 per day, which equates to less than $1,045 per person a year. So to be considered a low income country, average incomes need to be below $1,045 per person per year. In terms of high income countries, you need to be earning more than $34.89 per day, which equates to around $12,736 per person a year. If the average income per person is above $12,736, you would be considered to be a high income country. And again, when we're looking at the poverty line, the severe poverty line is considered to be less than $1.90 per day, to be living in severe poverty. In terms of key measures of economic development, GDP per capita is the main measure. So the final market value of all goods and services, so when we say the final market value, the end price sold to the end consumer or business within the country divided by the size of the population. Real GDP per capita is our main measure of economic development because it signals, after taking into account inflation, whether incomes per person are increasing. Increasing real GDP faster than population growth allows for increased incomes per person, or GDP per capita. So as output increases, that should help to create more demand for labour and more jobs and higher incomes. So the main measure is income per person. There are a lot of problems with using GDP. One of them is that in developing countries, they have a large informal sector. So a lot of the money that's made is either cash in hand, bartering, so by selling goods and services, or because of subsistence farming, where people really just live off their own land and grow all their own crops. They're not actually selling anything in a formal setting. So that leads to it being an inaccurate measure of living standards. So in terms of more detail, some problems with GDP per capita to measure development and living standards. One is unrecorded subsistence production. So GDP only measures the value of marketed goods and services brought and sold within traditional markets. But in low-income countries, a large percentage of the population are involved in subsistence production. They never actually sell their products, meaning GDP per capita seriously underestimates the true level of production going on in that country. So it leads to them underestimating the true living standards within those countries. An unequal distribution of income, so GDP per capita doesn't take into account how evenly goods and services are distributed amongst the population. Most low-income countries have an extreme inequality, Gini coefficients of around 0.6, 0.7 even, or generally 0.5 to 0.6. So they don't provide an indication of the general person's access to goods and services because it's just an average. They don't take into account negative externalities, so if there's a lot of pollution going on, causing things like climate change, particularly in overpopulated countries, that cost to society is not reflected within GDP per capita. It also doesn't take into account the consideration of quality of life. So it doesn't tell us whether the daily lives of ordinary people are getting better. It doesn't give us indication of things like life expectancy, access to health, access to clean water, education, justice, crime rates, freedom of speech, human rights. It's a whole range of factors that are not included within this GDP per capita figure. That means it's not an indication of the overall quality of life. So what they've done is they've come up with another figure, which again is not perfect. It also doesn't take into account a lot of these non-material factors, but it aims to be a better indication of progress within nations than just GDP per capita. So the Human Development Index takes into account both economic and social conditions, and basically it's got three different dimensions. One is income per head, adjusted for purchasing power parity, which means that if products are cheaper within that country, they adjust the GDP figure to signal the changes in prices. So if things are cheap in that country, then if the GDP per capita might be 1,000, but that might increase to 2,000 once you reflect the general price levels in that country. Second one is education levels. That's based on a range of things, including literacy rates, school attendance, and then retention rates, so how long people stay in school. So So it's probably the hardest one to measure. And then the last one is life expectancy, calculated birth. So what's the average life expectancy of people within these nations? Basically, the Human Development Index, using those three different dimensions, countries receive a figure between 0 and 1. A high HDI is signified by a number close to 1, where a low is generally close to 0. Most low-income countries have Human Development Index scores of around 0.3 or 0.29, while a lot of high-income countries have an index of around above 0.9%. 0.9 points, sorry. The aim of these is to give a more accurate indication of the development of countries by taking into account other things besides economic factors, but also a range of social indicators as well, which gives a better indication of both material and non-material living standards. So the Human Development Index, basically three things: living standards, health and education, measured by GNI per capita, life expectancy at birth, and mean average years of schooling. Some countries might have a higher GDP per capita. So, for example, Brunei has a much higher GDP per capita than Norway, but Norway has a higher Human Development Index score because it has better income inequality, and better access to schooling and higher life expectancies. As you can see, these are sort of just your broad range. So you can see a lot of the countries with high Human Development Index scores, Australia, a lot of Northern American countries, as well as most of Western Europe in particular, have higher Human Development Index scores. Africa, much lower, as well as parts of Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, as well as some of sort of your Central American nations as well. The last measure is what we call the World Bank income classifications. So what they do is they use gross national income per capita. So rather than just using GDP, they also include money that flows into those countries from people working overseas or owning property abroad. So they're called foreign remittances, which is basically a source of income from overseas from developing economies. And it gives a better indication of living standards because you may have citizens of a particular country that are working overseas, but their money is not included in GDP per capita, but it would be included within this GNI figure because they are citizens of that country. GNI of over 12,736 per person is generally considered to be a high income country. So as you can see, less than 1,045 is low, above 12,736 is high, and then between those two figures you've got your upper middle and your middle range. Summary: GNI purchasing power parity is a better measure of an indicator of material living standards than GDP per capita. It takes into account both the cost of living and foreign remittances. Low-income countries earning less than $1,035 per year and less than $1.90 per day is extreme poverty. Extreme poverty is characterised by severe deprivation of basic human needs like food, safe drinking water, sanitation, health, shelter, education, etc. GDP per capita has many limitations, which we talked about, and Human Development Indication takes into account GNI, education levels, and life expectancy. Thank you.